You're good.
Okay. So I would like to call the meeting of the Salem-Keizer Budget Committee to order. And as far as attendance tonight, Adam Kohler and Chuck Lee are absent, and Kathleen Harder, Marcia Atkinson, and Mark Bateman are attending by teleconference. So one of the things I should remind people is that they can only hear us on the conference call if we talk into our microphones. So, I will try and make sure to remember to ask them if there are questions before we end discussions on any item. So I believe the first item on the agenda is a report on behavioral learning.
Good, yes. All right, so I will take over, and I have quite a bit of information here, so we can, you can stop me if you have questions along the way. I'm trying to give you a picture of the Office of Behavioral Learning and some of the challenges we're facing. And this is just one piece of information I thought was important for you to understand about this year's budget. So the Office of Behavioral Learning was developed this school year, and for budget committee members that were here as part of last year, this was a new item, a new department within the budget. So we had some of the supports that were under student services, but we created its own department in response to the emerging needs of behaviors in classrooms and our need for behavioral learning. And we began to realize that it wasn't just a student services or special education issue, it was an issue for all of us. So that's where we developed the Department of Behavioral Learning. So prior to that, we did have several staff positions that were included in the student services budget, and those were school psychologists. The board heard about threat assessment and sexual incident response teams. We had social workers. We had behavior cadre. We had our BIC, which is our Behavior Intervention Center, and behavioral trainers. And then we had a positive behavior interventions and support consultant, or PBIS. In last year's budget message, we added about $945,000 in new expenses for the creation of the Office of Behavioral Learning. And that next set of bullets is where those dollars went to. So we added an administrator, PBIS program associate, 2 PBIS coaches, and 6.6 additional behavior cadres positions. After we proposed our budget, there was some additional budget dollars that came in through the supplemental budget, and we added 3 FTE of mental health therapists. And then additionally in January, we released some reserve FTE to fund some embedded behavior cadre out in our schools. So that's just a quick financial overview, but I'm going to go to the next page because there's more detail around each of those. So the pyramid on the top of the page, kind of, if you start at the bottom, social emotional learning curriculum and PBIS is what we do for all. We're not where we quite want to be yet with the social emotional learning, but that would be a strategy for all students. And then as you move up to the top, our most restrictive environment for students is our Behavior Intervention Center. So that's why it's at the top of the pyramid. As you move up from social emotional learning into behavior specialists are licensed educators for the most part at schools, and part of their job is to help with implementation of PBIS and some of those higher tier behaviors from our students. As you move up, again, not quite more restrictive, but fewer and fewer kids in this case, but we have a student threat assessment, which is looking at kids that might pose a threat to self or others, and a sexual incident response committee that also, again, looks at students, primarily made up of our school psychologists. Then we go further up, we have social workers and mental health specialists. The mental health specialists are generally county positions that come into our schools to do mental health therapists, along with we have some of our school psychologists that help with some of the mental health specialist work. The behavior cadre is a group of classified employees who are highly trained in managing students that exhibit behaviors outside of what we would consider the social norm. And so they will go into schools, set up behavior plans, help get students to get on the right track, to be able to access education. And the goal with the behavior cadre is that they set up systems in schools and then they leave and go on to the next school. What we're finding with some of our kids, though, is that that's when they leave, we fall back into patterns. So we've really had to expand that behavior cadre resource. As you move up, then we have a number of self-contained classrooms, and these are our special education classrooms and very restricted placements for students with behaviors. Then we also have a school psychologist student intervention team, and then the behavior center. At the behavior center, just as an example, we have about between 15 and 17 kids, depending on the day. We have 2 licensed special education teachers and 8 classified employees to work with about 15 kids out there. And it is not even in the school setting. It's its own special center and location. If you go on to the next page, I tried to just give you some data on kind of why we see it as important. The social workers, with 6 of them right now, they have about 453 kids on their caseloads. If you look at our behavior cadre referrals, in 16-17, we had 187 total. Last year, about this time, we had 136. This year, this time, we have 176. So you can see the escalation of referrals for behavior cadre help. The next one is the behavior consultation team referrals, 183 all year last year. This time last year, 150. And this time this year, 163.
Can I ask a question
Yep.
there? I noticed below you've got them broken out by elementary, middle, high. What's the ratios within those referrals?
I'm going to look at Sandy or David to answer that question. Sorry to call you out in the audience, but do you know
And I can get it offline too. If you
Okay.
want to email it, that's fine too. I was just wondering, are we looking more at middle school? Are we looking more at high school?
right now, I believe our intensity is actually in elementary. Is that accurate? Okay.
Okay.
In fact, when we released the FTE in January, and we are calling that the embedded behavior cadre, it only went to elementary schools.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
it's actually kindergarten, first, second grade is where we're seeing it. Okay, accurate?
And just one follow-up, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Do we know how many of those are ELL students? And how many are IEP students? And again, that may be
Yeah.
too much detailed information right now. I'm happy to get that offline.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I'd have that, other than generally they're not going to be IEP students yet.
Yeah.
Because they're coming in.
Because you're working on the referral.
Yeah, a number of them are coming in and then being assessed for special education. And we do have, I'll tell you, about 15 that could actually use a very restrictive placement. But we can get the EL.
Thanks.
Yep. Next, we have the intake support team placement, and this is our students that are transitioning from residential day treatment or coming from a more restricted setting in another school district. So this team looks at this group of kids coming in and then processes where's the best location for education. So 16, 17 for intake for EGC is 71. Life skills, 34, for a total of 105. And this year, as of February 22nd, we're at 86. Next, I'm just giving you the numbers of students in self-contained classrooms, either the Emotional Growth Center or the Life Skills Center. We have about 429 students already placed in those restrictive settings when you count. And I think I misspoke on the numbers, but about 23 at the Behavior Intervention Center. And currently, and this is why it's important for the budget, we have 13 elementary EGCs, 8 middle, 6 high school for 27 self-contained classrooms in the district in our emotional growth centers. And then for life skills, we have 9 elementary, 5 middle, and 5 high schools for a total of 19 specialized classrooms. And then finally, our student consultation intervention team, which is a group of district and community agencies that work together to identify appropriate school, district, and community-based supports for students and family. In 17-18, we have about 38 students with their families that we consult with. So I wanted to show this to you because the Office of Behavioral Learning is a big place in our budget. It was a shift from 16-17 into 17-18, and you can see, I think, from the numbers, the ongoing need around behavioral learning in the district. Our goal is really with those elementary kids to get them in a place where then they can access their regular education. So I'll stop there and let you ask questions.
Do you have any money in here to help train teachers?
So the teacher training piece of it are the positive behavior intervention support coaches, and the behavior cadre when they go out, and especially if they're working with an individual student in a classroom, can help teachers write the behavior plan, get them structured. But again, it doesn't always, the student can't always maintain when that support leaves.
Right.
All?
I want to make sure I'm understanding. So the behavior cadre are classified,
Yes.
and there are 21 of them?
Yes, I think that's number's accurate.
Okay. Okay.
Jesse, did you have a question?
Yes. So my question is, so the Behavioral Intervention Center, is this, which part of these people deal with actual, like, students and, like, helping them? Like, for example, it seems a lot of these have, like, the student threat assessment as well as the sexual incident report response. Is that the team where, let's say, we had a student who displayed behavior of instability and possible future danger?
Yeah, could you speak in the mic too for the?
Oh, sure. So if we had a student that theoretically had like showed instability and could be a potential threat to other students as well as our schools and our teachers, where in this would that get taken care of? Like, can you kind of walk it through how this would happen?
So, remember last meeting when John Vander was speaking out about the threat assessment team?
Yeah.
And we use specific protocols when we work with a threat. So that is, if you look at the pyramid, the student set threat assessment and sexual incidents response.
Okay.
And that's the group right there. And I'm trying to think what I don't think I have the staffing level on that, but we have a number of school psychologists that is a big portion of their job.
Okay, awesome. And then I would also like to see like the numbers of, just because sometimes, especially like if you look at local police stuff, a lot of times they get the amount of complaints they get versus the ones they can actually respond to. They're kind of overwhelmed. And I would like to see the numbers of, if that's even possible, I don't know, of how much they have on their plate and how much they're dealing with to ensure that they can actually take time to look into these things. Is that doable, or do you think?
Well, if we get a request for a level 1 threat assessment on a student, we complete every level 1 threat assessment on a student.
so
If it goes to level 2, we complete every level 2. And we're staffed okay for that. They have a lot on their caseloads, but I think that there's times they would work into the night to do a level 2 threat assessment or 3 on a student, if that were the case.
Okay, good.
And it's a multidisciplinary team when it gets to level 2, not just our school staff, but community agencies as well that are part of the level 2
Okay,
team.
awesome.
So-
Thank you.
Level 1 is the least serious, and it goes up from there.
Yep, and level 1 actually can get done at the school level within the district overseeing the protocol.
So even the level 1s are getting handled, and
Okay.
Correct, yeah,
Okay.
correct.
yeah.
This is
Another
Kathleen. Can I ask
Oh.
a question?
Yes, go ahead.
And you may have already addressed it. There's a bit of a time delay on this. My question is, on the behavioral cadre, are they specialized by age group, or are they just taking all comers?
The behavior cadre takes all comers, so they'll go across all levels. The bulk of their work right now is done at the elementary level, though.
So we don't have behavioral cadre members that are specifically trained to handle issues at elementary versus early adolescent versus adolescent behavior.
Here's what I think the answer is, but I'm going to double check it. I think there are some of them within the team that probably have a better understanding of that than others, so they dispatch accordingly, but they're a K-12 team.
Thank you.
Paul?
Is the same true with the PBIS coaches when there's only 2 of them? How do they prioritize their work? Are they only at elementary, only at middle, only at high? Are they 10 minutes at one and 10 minutes at another? How do they cover the entire district if there's only 2 of them?
K-12, and they prioritize based on when the school's ready for them to have training and the coaching. They do some district-wide trainings where people come to them, so they're not going out to every school, but they will prioritize school based on where they are asked to come.
So they have to be asked by,
The PBIS team at the school,
and that's comprised of,
teachers and administrator,
and
behavior specialist.
and I mean, I would imagine that several schools probably are in the queue to get their help.
I don't know where their caseload is, but I can get that to you.
Okay.
Other questions? No, just,
Yeah, the behavior specialist side, are they, what kind of positions are they usually in? Are they typically community school outreach or?
So the community school outreach coordinators, the CSOC, are different positions. These are separate positions within a school that are actually licensed staff members. And middle school and high schools had them for a number of years. In about the last 3 or 4 years, we've added a half-time behavior specialist who's a licensed educator at every elementary school. So some schools could have a community outreach coordinator and a behavior specialist.
other questions?
Yeah, I have
Kathy?
a couple. So that same behavior specialist, how are they trained and what kind of educational background do they have? Are they a licensed teacher? Do they have a specialist in guidance and counseling or in some kind of helpful area?
Most are licensed teachers. I'm not 100% sure, but there could be somebody that has a counselor's license that we wouldn't preclude them if they did to be a behavior specialist. And we're working more and more to get them more training because it was an area in the district that was fairly loose for what they did a number of years ago. And as the behavior acuity has increased, it's more and more important that we're really more directive with how they spend their time. So it's not a perfectly trained system yet.
Okay, what happens to the child that is really actively acting out and it's not possible to keep them in their classroom right then? What's that process?
It varies by school. In some cases, a behavior specialist might work with them. In some cases, the principal might work with them. In some of our elementary schools, there's a sensory room where they'll go and spend a little time getting some of the energy out. In our middle schools and high schools, if the behavior is against the discipline policy, there could be an out-of-school or in-school suspension.
Okay. That school psychologist in the top level, they're expensive, I know that, and well paid. Does that school psychologist make plans for children that he's seen? I hope he does more than just test. Does he?
Yes, yes. Our school psychologists are district positions, so they're not tied to a school, but they do some direct service out in schools with our very highest acuity kids.
Okay, how many of those do we have?
We have 2 within the Office of Behavioral Learning. I know.
So when I was here 18 years ago, we had 3. So that just kind of puts it in perspective. That's very low for a district this size.
Other questions? Any other questions from people on the phone? Okay. Then the next item on the agenda is the class size report.
Right, and I'm going to turn it over to Linda Myers to share with you the class size report.
All right, I'm going to check. Is this on? I can't tell whether it's on or not. Okay, thank you. So turning to your class size report, class size is always a topic of interest when it comes to budgeting, and rather than try to give you average class size or some overview numbers that don't typically inform the decision making, we've decided to provide some additional information in this format. So the numbers that are represented here are accurate as of second semester in this current school year. And so before we dig into the numbers, let me just frame the dollar figures associated with this. We typically are asked, what would it cost to reduce class size? So in order to reduce class size by 1 student in our classrooms for kindergarten, first and second grade, that cost is approximately $1.5 million. So we'll begin with that top chart then for elementary schools. Looking at a 2-year comparison, so 2017 being last school year, so those are numbers from essentially the spring of 2017 compared to now numbers essentially winter, spring of 2018. So you'll notice those are also broken up by grade band, K1, 2, 3, and 4, 5. In looking at K1, so our youngest students, we have done a nice job of holding steady on the number of classrooms with 30 or more students. So we had 16 last year this time, and we now have 17 classrooms across the entire district with more than 30 students in K1. And similarly, we in grades 2 and 3 have had good movement in class size. So again, actually a decrease in classes of students of 30 or more students, and an increase of students in the range 25 to 29, which would be appropriate for a second or third grade classroom, and then a decrease of classrooms that have very few students, so 24 students or less. Marty?
For the K through second grade classrooms, the 1.5 million, is that just staffing, or would that include additional facilities because you need space, classrooms, or pods, or someplace to put them?
Correct. Yeah, you have identified probably one of the most significant barriers in being able to mitigate class size. That dollar figure represents FTE only, and you've identified that we don't currently have the space, the classroom capacity to manage those additional numbers of classrooms. I should have noted before I jumped into those elementary numbers, the numbers that are reflected there in that table are only inclusive of general education regular classrooms. They do not include special education self-contained classrooms, and they also don't factor in FTE that's allocated to pullouts or specials, PE, music, things like that. So those are just general classroom numbers.
Jesse?
Just really quick, I was curious as to why are some of these over 100% with the classrooms?
Are you totaling down to where are we looking?
Oh, it's up by 119%?
That's the number of classes,
Oh, that's the number of classes.
and then the percentage is next to it.
Never mind.
Okay,
Thank you.
no problem.
That's fine.
I thought it was like.
Clarify one more time. I'm sorry. One more time for me. Was that 1.5 million FTE?
That is only
Only.
FTE, correct.
Okay. materials?
Nope.
Nothing.
No. But I do believe that is the full weight of the FTE. So I believe that that number includes the benefits package as well.
Jesse?
I have one more thing. Have we sent this to the legislature at all?
I personally have not submitted this document to anyone in the legislature, no.
Okay.
Moving on to middle school, rather than quantifying all of the middle schools into one chart, this is a representative sample. There is some diversity across the middle schools, but providing you a sample of comparing a Title I middle school to a non-Title middle school. The range of classrooms is just an interesting point of data to review. So looking at the smallest class size that we have in a Title school is 5 students, and those are students enrolled in an academic support class. So we actually are able to provide some very specialized kind of support to students that need that in either reading or math in a classroom that small. And conversely, 71 kids in a classroom, actually we celebrate that level of participation in our music classrooms, even at the middle school level. So those are things that actually feel really good to me, that particularly in a Title middle school, that we've got 70 plus kids participating in a music class. Similar numbers as far as the range in a non-Title school, but you will begin to see some disparities between classroom numbers between a Title school and a non-Title school. So the percentage of classes in a Title building with 35 or more is significantly less. Conversely, you have almost half of your classrooms, 49% of your classrooms in a Title school are held to 25 or fewer. So there is also a list below with just a brief narrative that demonstrates what kind of classes. Courses that have 25 students or fewer enrolled in them are typically held to that standard on purpose. So we are looking at a limited enrollment for a language arts support class, or Read 180 or Math 180. There are examples of core classes and electives with 25 or fewer, but the vast majority of those courses are held to that limited enrollment on purpose. On the other side, classes that have 35 or more at the middle school level, in most cases, that's a completely appropriate number: choir, art, 6th grade wheel, PE, health, and then there are some limited sections of core classes in both Social Studies 7 and Social Studies 8, as well as Japanese, family and consumer studies or science. I don't remember what FACS stands for now these days. It's changed, and foods.
What's the 6th grade wheel?
So 6th grade wheel is an elective opportunity for 6th grade students. So during the course of 18 weeks in a semester, they may spend 6 weeks in health. They may spend 6 weeks in it's different per school, but they rotate through different opportunities. 6 weeks in computers or keyboarding, 6 weeks. So it's called the wheel because they can generate multiple students through courses on a 6 weeks rotation.
Other questions? Oh, Libby?
Yeah. Sorry if you mentioned this, but could you explain a little bit why the non-Title schools will have a higher percentage of classrooms, 35 or more?
So it may be connected directly to the staffing that is provided. So a Title school is provided additional funding that is weighted upon the students who are classified as being in poverty in that building. And so that FTE, that staffing, can be applied to general classrooms. They may be able to offer additional intervention classes. They may be able to offer additional sections of core language arts or core math. And so just by virtue of the fact that they have additional FTE in their building, they frequently are able to spread the FTE across, resulting in a smaller class size in a Title building than a building that only receives FTE out of general fund.
This is Kathleen. I have a question for you as well.
Go ahead.
Can you compare our class sizes to Portland Public Schools and other districts our size throughout the country?
Kathleen, I haven't completed that analysis, but we certainly could do some looking. At times, it's difficult to compare apples to apples in that oftentimes the information that's released publicly is based on some sort of average, and at times it's difficult to determine what's computed into those averages. For instance, at the secondary level, things like teacher's aid, where you have one student who's technically enrolled in a class. If those numbers are calculated into an average, those types of statistical variances can pretty substantially impact an average. I certainly could make some telephone calls and look at getting some of that information if you'd like.
I think that'd be helpful. Also, I'd like to know if we're successful in passage of the school bond, what are we expecting these numbers to go to?
So I'll weigh in on that, Kathleen. We are developing extra space, and the answer to that will be based on how the legislature funds our schools. And so we've got to keep that advocacy with adequate and stable funding at the state level.
So that would mean that if the bond passes, the roadblock of facilities would
Would
be
be
lessened,
removed.
but we still would need to get the funding needed
Correct.
to
Yep.
pay for the staffing.
Correct. There will be a few places, like Gubser is an example of every classroom in that school is over 30, and we've added an additional teacher to that site, but we don't have a space, so the teacher doesn't reduce class size. This teacher helps out with reducing workload, but not class size. So there'd be a few places it would lower.
Other questions on middle school?
I actually had a question, but I don't actually know how to ask it. So I've been over here like trying to figure it out. But it has more to do with ratio, I think.
Okay.
I'm trying to like formulate a question around that idea because we look at these numbers and it's basically on a classroom, but these classrooms all are varying and teachers that are in them, right? So do we have information based on ratio that you could get?
So we do initial allocations of staffing, basically based on an educator to student ratio. But again, particularly at the secondary level, as soon as you move into a master schedule, a period-based day, the master schedule and the FTE required for that drives how many sections of each course you have available based upon students who are required to take that based upon students who forecast. So a ratio probably could give you some valuable information, potentially K-5, but I think it might not be the right number for secondary.
I'm thinking elementary, so.
And we certainly could
Yeah.
look at,
Okay.
We got away from ratios because it didn't tell the variance. And so, well, what's that mean about how many classrooms over 30? So that we began presenting this information because we thought that was more telling than we staff at 25 to 27,
Sure.
depending on primary. So that's why we went to this.
Yeah, and they both make sense.
They do.
Yeah.
Paul?
I have a question for Linda. She just made a statement that it's determined by educator. How are you defining educator in the building to determine staffing? Is that teachers or educator?
so when I'm talking about a ratio, when we start with an allocation,
Yes.
you'll have to tell me, I'm trying to think about what I said exactly. So at the middle school and the high school level, the staffing is a composite, I guess, is that the right word, that includes behavior specialists, instructional mentors. That is an educator, maybe a licensed staff
So
would be a
not a
better
classroom
term.
teacher.
At the elementary school, it is a classroom teacher. So the
Doesn't
allocation.
include counselors or vice principals or
Not K-
principals
not
or anyone
K-5.
else at the elementary, but at the high school and middle school it does.
I don't believe any of them include administrators. The administrative FTE is never calculated into the allocation, into the staffing FTE allocation system.
But it does include behavior specialists, counselors,
There is a difference. in the-
non-classroom people.
Correct, there is a difference.
Okay.
When we shared class size, though, we're only sharing those teachers with kids in classrooms.
So
Okay.
there's no assistants in here or classroom helpers that are I don't mean volunteer moms that come in, but I mean hired by the district, extra people.
Not in this report.
Okay.
So, for example, at kindergarten, we add classified instructional assistant support to our kindergarten classrooms, but we don't present that in this report.
So this is really focusing on classrooms rather than on staffing ratios.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Moving on to high school. So there are some summary statements here. Again, the variances in our 6 comprehensive high schools, it was easier to just provide some summary statements rather than attempt to provide you a large set of data. So these numbers are actually reflective of semester 1. So this is different. These are end of the semester numbers from January of 2018 versus brand new semester 2 numbers. So the median enrollment for semester 1 in January of 2018 in math was 29, and the median enrollment in language arts across the 6 comprehensive high schools was 30. More than half of the classes across all the high schools sit between 23 and 34, and more than half of the classes at our title high schools, which are North and McKay, again, just looking at the 6 comprehensive high schools, those numbers sit between 25 and 33 students. There are classrooms with fewer than 10 students across the district. There are actually 141 of those spread out across the 6 comprehensive high schools. But again, the vast majority of those are special education classrooms. And there are, on the flip side, there are 36 classrooms that have more than 45 students, and those courses include music, both band, choir, and orchestra, leadership classes, PE, and theater courses, drama classes.
Paul?
I'm confused, Linda, which is not hard, as you know. Those with more than 50% of the classes across the comprehensive high schools are between 23 and 34. Does that mean that the other 49% or whatever are over 34?
Or under 23.
Like, do we have any breakdown of what those percentages are?
We didn't break that down, so
I
again.
realize the 50% looks good,
Sure,
but I'd like to know the outliers.
and we could build a graph similar to the elementary chart that would break your 30, 25 to 29, and 24. Again, those classrooms with less than 24, and again, we made a note of the classrooms that actually have fewer than 10. Those would need some qualifiers on them, but we certainly could do that. Are you interested specifically in the percentage of courses that are over 34?
Number of classrooms that are over. And then any research that goes with it to say where the breakdown is in terms of class size. I mean, I can't imagine that a class of 34 is the same for having been a teacher once upon a time. Classroom at 34 doesn't require much more than a class of 23. But maybe there's no research that says that. Could just be my inadequacies as a teacher.
And we can certainly, so we went to the 45 indicator, so the 36 classrooms that have more than 45, but we certainly could just as easily use some information on what are the classes at that 35 students or greater.
Between 34 and 45.
Exactly, how many
we've got
classes are in there.
11 kids there somewhere.
Yeah, I can pull that.
Okay.
One other just quick follow-up. I assume when you're going to come up with this additional data, it'll be pumped out to all of us?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Linda, this is Kathleen again. One more question. As you're pulling this data, I think it would be helpful for us to understand where we are if we can get comparative data, again, between districts of similar size, and what the best analyses are of what the numbers should be for optimum learning experience to different levels. And I know that data is difficult to collate, but I think it would be very helpful to help to digest this and come to a more clear understanding.
Sure, Kathleen. I can certainly pull some of that together. There's actually a broad base of research on class size, and we can certainly provide links to some of that. And you'll see there are actually opinions kind of on both sides of the fence of this issue, but we certainly can get some of the latest and best research in front of you as well.
Thank you.
This is Mark. Couple of questions. One, within the high school master schedule process, are there any instances that we're aware of where qualified students were kept out of AP classes because class size was too high? And then the second question is a similar question related to any of our career tech offerings.
I don't have that specific data at my fingertips, Mark, but I certainly can ask that question. I do think it's important for the Budget Committee to be aware that there is a significant initiative occurring at the high schools for investing in AP and IB coursework, particularly in seeking out underrepresented student populations that have not historically enrolled in AP, IB courses. And so that's work that we've done in cooperation with EOS, Equal Opportunity Schools, and our high schools have done a really nice job of closing the gap as far as increasing the enrollment of underrepresented students in AP courses to more accurately reflect the statistical representation of either that ethnic group or that race in the student population as a whole.
And one of the things that I want to make sure is that in those efforts, we don't end up plateauing and ceasing those efforts because we're about to trip over and to have equal class sizes. We might have 2 classes of 18, and we don't feel we can support that instead of a class of 36 or 37.
Got it. Yep, I understand the question. I can get that.
Thank you.
Was that for CET classes as well?
Yes, he asked for
Good.
both.
Thank you.
And I guess somewhat related to that, in general, are AP classes, is the ratio and IB classes at the same, is it basically the same ratio as regular classes in terms of students per teacher, and what would be considered a class that's too large?
Yeah, I can pull that specifically and add all of that kind of in a robust analysis of AP and IB enrollment.
Okay, I'll speak out. I'm certainly familiar with AP enrollment, but I don't know what IB is.
IB stands for International Baccalaureate. That is the rigorous coursework that is offered at South Salem High School, and so students actually can pursue a course of study in IB and actually graduate with an IB diploma.
Got it.
Jesse?
I think it might be helpful for us, especially for, since our district's coming out with a plan to address special education. I think it would be really cool if we could get a report on, because it says there were 145 classes with fewer than 10 students. Majority of them are special education classrooms. I would really like it if we could have a report that shows kind of a breakdown of that. Because for us, when I see 10 students as a special education class, I'm like, wow, that seems kind of small because it's only 10 in comparison to the 30. But I'm not entirely sure, because I have no experience in special education, how much work, like how much what the teacher to a special education ratio would take, how much it is, just because I'm not in that field. So what I would like is kind of a breakdown, and also just a separate report on that. And if you guys could help educate us on what the people in that field are wanting, or what they look like, or what their struggles are with class sizes, or if that's even an issue, I don't know. But I think if we addressed it as a separate report, I think it'd be really cool, especially if we're trying to address special education through one of our district plans.
They got that by district in that report.
Other class size issues?
Yeah, and not to make your job any easier, but I think most people in the district are wanting to know about their school building, about the school their kids go to.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to come up with some kind of average or class size per school building?
So we have some of that data. Our elementary level directors actually have done a great job of compiling some data by individual elementary school, and they were specifically targeting the number of classes in that individual school that had 30 or more students, and so they were beginning to be able to measure where maybe we have some bubbles, and some of that, again, is constricted by space. Gubser is the example we will continue to come back to. But we could look at generating some school-specific data. Again, it's a little more difficult to flesh that out in middle school and high school, but we certainly, if we're going to dig into some of these numbers, we certainly in at least one of these reports could get you information by school.
And just to be clear, can we get that same thing for the special education?
By school,
Or as a whole, however you feel necessary?
so explain to me what you're looking for, Jesse.
Just a breakdown of the class size for special education, the average class size per classroom, and I guess teacher per classroom, and if that's sufficient, if it's not, or how parents and teachers are feeling on it. Just because we don't know. When we see that looks low to me, but I don't know because none of us are in that field. So if we could get just a quick synopsis of, hey, here's typically how much they have per classroom, and this is manageable, and if we're doing well on that.
And you're speaking specifically about the self-contained special education classrooms.
Sure.
We'll work on it
Well-
and we'll see. How about that?
Yes.
I think
Don't-
you're specifically talking about the classrooms, 141 classrooms at high school with fewer than 10 students. That's what you want to know. What's the makeup of those?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kathy?
Or, if I'm mistaken, say so, but I don't think all special ed kids are in their high school core area. I mean, they're placed for physical or other disabilities, so it might not show what
Yeah.
you think it will.
Let's look at it and we'll do a first look at it and then we'll see.
Are there other class size questions? So now we have about 7 minutes. And so is that going to be enough time, or should we bounce it out to the 20th? Or do you want to give us a little snapshot and we'll come back to it and the various other class size issues on March 20th?
Sure. I can give you a teaser on
Okay.
PERS, and then we can see how far we want to go. So
Okay.
I can jump in and kind of go over the chart here briefly, and if we need more follow-up, then we can certainly carry that to the next meeting. So this is the overview of our PERS, Public Employee Retirement System. And just to review, the rates are set by the PERS board based on the December valuation of odd years for the next biennium. So in other words, the 1921 biennial rate, sorry about that, not 1920, but 1921 biennial rate will be based on the December 17 valuation that will become public in September of this year. So that's how the biennial rates are set, right? The valuation of the odd year. We do get an advisory rate, an advisory actuarial study on the even years, and that gives us an idea of what we're looking at in the formal valuation in the odd year. And we can talk about that in just a minute. The chart is the same for 18-19 as it was for 17-18, but let me go over some of the differences briefly because not everyone was here for that conversation and the shift between 16-17 and the 17-18 columns. Prior to the 17-18 budget, which is the budget that we automated using our financial management system, we had blended rates. In other words, there's a certain percentage of our workforce in Tier 1, Tier 2. There's a certain percentage of our workforce in OPSI. And so we took those percentages and had a blended rate that we applied across all employee groups, both employee groups, essentially. By automating with our financial management system in 17-18, the current budget, we were actually able to allocate the actual rates based on if you're a Tier 1 or Tier 2 employee, here's what your real rate is, And if you're an OpCert employee, here's what your real rate is. And so you can see we moved from a blended rate of 9.51% in 16-17, which was the last year of the 15-17 biennium. So you can see the increase in the first year of the 17-19 biennium in the 17-18 year. It's a lot of numbers here, but I just want to show you and explain some of the differences between the columns. And so having said that, the 18-19 column is exactly the same as the 17-18 column as far as the rates, because they're set for an entire biennium for a two-year period. Just to remind the Budget Committee, though, that the PERS system is tracking a fairly large unfunded actuarial liability. And Jim, I don't know exactly what the number is now, but based on the December 31st, 16 valuation, it was right at 20 billion. I think it was reduced by about 3 billion because of the market performance.
It's about there.
Yeah. So we're still talking about a $17 billion unfunded actuarial liability for the entire system. And just to bring that home for the district in just a few minutes, in 2014, the board approved the issuance of about $50 million worth of pension obligation bonds, which was our district's unfunded actuarial liability at the time. So we extinguished our UAL in 2014. Based on the December 31st, 16 valuation, our district's UAL is now over $480 million. Just to give you a sense where we went from zero in 2014 to over $480 million in 2016. So all that to say, it's one of our major cost drivers, and we have little or no influence over it from biennium to biennium. The one thing that the board has been able to do over the years is issue pension obligation bonds to actually pay our UAL down, which has equated to about a 6% rate reduction for us as a district. So the district, the board has made decisions to issue pension obligation bonds starting in 2002, a series in 2004. We had a refund series in 2011, and then the 2015, $50 million. So that's over $250 million, about $260 million, that the board has issued pension obligation bonds to reduce the cost, the operational cost to the district over those years, which has saved tens of millions of dollars in operational costs that we've been able to turn back into the classroom to meet classroom needs.
Marty?
Quick question. You know, I always get kind of confused with the PERS things and unfunded liability and all that. So, for example, in the Tier 1, Tier 2 for 17-18, it's 16.38%. Of what? Is that salary or what?
It is, yeah,
Salary?
it is. And so when you add up that, let's say, and then you add the 6% pickup.
Which we pay for them or they pay themselves?
No, the employer picks it up for the employee. And then our debt service on those pension obligation bonds that I just talked about is a little over 9%.
Thank you.
So if you add those three up for Tier 1, Tier 2, that's the total payroll rate for Tier 1, Tier 2. If you switch Tier 1, Tier 2 with OpCert and then added the 6 and the 9, then that's the rate, payroll rate that OpCert employees cost as far as PERS. I will say, just to wrap up, that the rates are, the UAL is expected to peak in the 21-23 biennium, and the employer rates are expected to peak in the 29-31 biennium. So this is a long-term proposition for the state. There are no quick fixes in this system.
Okay, well, we are running out of time. Would it be useful for you to get other questions on this by email if we're going to continue the discussion on the 20th? Do we need to continue the discussion on the 20th?
I'm happy to entertain any questions via email, though.
Well, Why don't we say that if there are questions that didn't get answered here that you would like addressed at the March 20th meeting, to get those to staff in the next couple of weeks, and then you can take what you get and see what else it seems like we need to hear.
Okay, great.
Rachel, this is Kathleen. I wonder if we could at least ask for maybe Mike to give us a PERS 101 to kind of give us a little bit more background in understanding what some of these numbers mean, so that, again, we can have a better idea of where to go forward.
Happy to.
Okay. Other requests in the last 30 seconds before we have to adjourn? Okay. If not, we're adjourned, and the next meeting is March 20th.
There she is. All right. I would like to call this meeting to order.
No, I got a cold.
7 o'clock.
Still.
The board meeting is limited to a business session to include a public hearing and executive session. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. All board members are present except Director Lee, who was detained tonight. There is an agenda modification. There will be no executive session. So the executive session is canceled. We will not need it tonight. So we have public comment related to agenda items only. Do we have anyone signed up? We have no one signed up for that, okay? Public hearing, and we are, trying to think, do I have a script here? I don't think so.
No, we just have to open the public hearing.
I would at this point in time like to open the public hearing regarding the finding of fact for alternative contracting. Public hearing is open, and I believe we're on to Mr. Wolf.
Good evening, Superintendent, Chair Kylo, and members of the board. So tonight is the formal action on the findings of fact in support of the use of construction manager general contractor methodology for the 2018 general obligation construction bond. You've had this report in your packet. It was an informational item at our last meeting. We have some strike-throughs that I wanted to call your attention to, but essentially the report is virtually the same as you've seen. Instead of the bond oversight team, same group of people. I think we got a promotion, I'm not sure, but we're now the bond program management team. And the reason for that is that we know that after a bond passes in this district and many others, that there's a group of citizens that are pulled together, and it's usually called a Citizens Bond Oversight Committee or team. And so we didn't want two oversight teams, one internal and one external, which is really the main change in the titles. But this report clearly lines out your role based on ORS 279C.335, which you operate as a local contract review board, and this hearing is to allow comments on the district's draft findings prior to approval. And so by having this hearing tonight, and anyone who wishes to testify, we fulfill the obligation to hold the hearing prior to your deliberation and action on the findings of fact. And really, to recap, it's essentially an alternative contracting methodology from the traditional design bid build methodology that the whole system, contracting system, is based on. So whenever there's a change from that methodology, it requires a formal hearing and a formal process by the contract review board.
Okay. Is there anyone here for that purpose? Alice, do we have anyone signed up? No? Yes, Mike?
There's one other change I wanted to call your attention to. In the findings of fact on page 2, if you flip it over, there's the actual criteria And the original document had that the criteria would be any project that would exceed 30 million in estimated construction costs. We received feedback from the business community that 20 million would be a more appropriate number, and so we have adjusted accordingly.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone here now wish to testify? I'm not seeing anyone. I believe we can close the hearing unless Mike has something else for us.
Nope, I'm good.
With that, the public hearing is closed. Thank you. And we have we have an action item 4A, and that would be, is someone willing to make the motion to approve the finding of facts in support?
So moved.
Thank you, Jim. Second was Marty. Thank you. Any discussion?
Just one question. Do we need to make the official language in there, Mike, that we are approving the exemption, or are we good with just?
No, so you approve the, yes, you do need to approve the exemption.
So I move that we have the findings of fact in support of the use of a CMGC methodology for the 2018 general obligation bond and grant an exemption from the competitive bidding requirement for public improvement contracts,
Okay,
as stated in the findings of fact.
Okay, is the second in agreement with that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Any further discussion? Discussion?
Seems pretty clear.
Discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item. Who's presenting this one? Are you? This is the Catholic Community Services Foundation tax exempt status.
Yes, this is second reading action item, and again, you were presented the information at the last meeting. Legislation that had historically granted property tax exemptions for low-income housing by nonprofit organizations was basically put, a moratorium was put in place. Local jurisdictions, though, City of Salem and Marion County in particular, have passed local ordinances now, though, to allow the exemption to move forward. And Catholic Community Services Foundation has two affordable complexes, one at 539 Statesman Street Northeast in Salem, and then one off of Wallace Road. And you can see the description of the units. The 1718 property tax is dedicated to the district is almost about $7,300. And so what the board is actually doing is concurring. The action would be to concur with the City of Salem and Marion County agencies for the Catholic Community Services Foundation tax exempt status for low-income housing. In other words, they had to, this organization had to apply for the exemption in both of those jurisdictions, and they have been approved by both the county and the city. And so, but part of the approval process is to make sure that they receive concurrence from 51% of the taxing jurisdictions, which means Salem-Keizer School District. Also, I can tell you that this organization has reached out to all of the taxing jurisdictions, even those that would be minimally impacted.
Okay. Any questions for Mike on this one?
No, I make a motion.
Okay. Motion.
I'd like to make a motion to concur with the City of Salem and Marion County agencies for Catholic Community Services Foundation tax exempt status for low-income housing.
Okay.
second.
Jesse, second, thank you. Questions? Questions for Mike? Questions? I have one. Mike, in the document we have, it says that the city approved it on February 12th. It's in the large paragraph towards the bottom, second, it's four lines down in the big paragraph, which is three paragraphs from the bottom, February 12th.
Right.
We met on February 13th, and they didn't approve it on February 12th. So when did the city approve it?
That's a really good question. That's absolutely right. I remember having that conversation. I will follow up.
Well, I understand that they did approve it. I'm just curious of the day. So
And I don't know offhand,
Okay,
but
that's
let me go ahead and follow up.
That's fine. Well, we have a
Absolutely.
motion, and so,
Okay.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
I would just say, not related to this particular action, but because the city and the county have passed local ordinances, there will be others. Others have already approached staff to be brought forward to the board.
Of course.
Okay.
How much Walter Persky gave assistant? Okay, thanks, Mike. Information items. The next board meeting will be March 13th, 6 PM in this room. And then there is a budget committee meeting scheduled for March 20th at 6 PM in this room again. Okay. Next item would be public comment. Are there individuals who wish to comment on non-agenda items? We have no one signed up. Thank you, Alice. Okay. The executive session has been canceled, so with that, we are adjourned.